Close your eyes and imagine this. It's a dark and chilly night in April 1775. The moon hides behind the clouds, and the streets of Boston are silent. Most people are asleep in their warm beds, but one man, sitting near a candlelit table, is wide awake, his heart racing. His name is Paul Revere, and tonight he's about to make a ride that will change American history forever. Paul Revere wasn't a soldier. He was a silversmith, someone who made beautiful silver cups, bowls, and jewelry. But he was also a patriot, a man who loved his country and wanted to see it free from British rule. For years, the American colonists had suffered under the British Empire's heavy taxes. They were forced to pay money on things like paper, tea, and stamps, even though they had no say in how the government worked. People called this unfair rule taxation without representation. Protests had already broken out. There had been the Boston Tea Party, where angry colonists dumped tea into the harbor. And now things were getting even more dangerous. British soldiers had arrived in Boston, red-coated and armed, ready to keep the colonists quiet. But the people were not quiet. They were preparing to fight for their freedom. One April day, Paul Revere received secret news. The British Army was planning a surprise march from Boston to the town of Concord. Their mission? To seize the colonists' hidden weapons and to arrest two important leaders, Samuel Adams and John Hancock. Paul knew the colonists had to be warned before sunrise. But how? The British were watching every road, every bridge. That's when Paul and his friends, members of the secret group called the Sons of Liberty, came up with a brilliant plan. Paul turned to his friend Robert Newman, the church sexton of the Old North Church. He said quietly, "If the British move by land, hang one lantern in the church tower. But if they come by sea, hang two. That way, people across the river would know how the British were coming, and Paul could start his ride." Late that night, the signal shone from the tower. 2 lanterns. That meant the British were coming by boat across the Charles River. Paul's eyes widened. He whispered to himself, 2 if by sea, it's time. Paul Revere hurried to the riverbank where a small boat waited for him. He climbed in, carrying a heavy saddle and a thick cloak to protect him from the cold wind. Silently, 2 men rowed him across the dark river. The sound of the oars splashing against the water was the only noise in the night. In the distance, British warships floated, black and menacing shapes against the fog. When Paul reached the other side, a horse was waiting for him, a strong brown mare named Brown Beauty. He climbed onto her back, took a deep breath, and galloped into the darkness. Paul Revere rode as fast as the wind. through the towns of Murdford, Lexington, and Concord, his voice rang through the night. "The British are coming! The British are coming!" Windows flew open. Farmers, blacksmiths, and shopkeepers jumped out of bed. They grabbed their muskets and rushed to spread the word to their neighbors. Everywhere Paul rode, lights flickered on. Church bells rang. The sleepy countryside woke up, alive with the spirit of freedom. But Paul Revere's ride was not easy. British patrols were everywhere, and if they caught him, he could be jailed or worse. At one point, Revere saw a group of red-coated soldiers blocking the road. He quickly turned his horse down a side path through the woods, branches whipping past his face. Brown Beauty leaped over ditches and fences, racing through the night. Finally, he met up with two other riders, William Dawes and Dr. Samuel Prescott. Together, the three men rode through the countryside, shouting their warning at every farmhouse they passed. But as they neared the town of Concord, trouble found them. A group of British soldiers rode out of the shadows and surrounded them. "Stop! In the name of the king!" one soldier shouted. Paul froze. There were too many of them. He and Dawes were captured, while Dr. Prescott managed to escape and continue the warning. The soldiers questioned Paul harshly. "Who sent you? Where are the rebel leaders?" they demanded. But Paul refused to answer. Instead, he said calmly, "You won't stop the news. The countryside is already awake." Furious but unsure what to do, the soldiers took his horse and finally let him go. Paul walked the rest of the way to Lexington on foot, exhausted but proud. As dawn broke over the hills, the sound of drums and shouting filled the air. British troops had reached Lexington Green, where a group of American farmers, known as Minutemen, stood waiting. No one knows who fired the first shot, but that single gunshot became known as the shot heard round the world. The American Revolution had begun. Paul Revere's ride didn't stop the British Army that night, but it did something even more important. It united the people. Within hours, hundreds of patriots were ready to fight for liberty. The message had spread far and wide. The colonies would never be the same again. Paul Revere returned home safely, tired but proud. He had done his duty, not as a soldier, but as a patriot. Years after the war, America was free and independent. Paul Revere went back to his silversmith shop and continued his craft, but his name had already become a legend. In 1860, the poet Henry Wadsworth Longfellow wrote a famous poem called Paul Revere's Ride. It began with the words, "Listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere." That poem made sure the world would never forget the brave man who rode through the night, warning his people and awakening a nation. Paul Revere's story teaches us something powerful, that even an ordinary person can make an extraordinary difference. He didn't carry a sword or command an army. He carried a message and the courage to deliver it. Because sometimes one brave voice in the darkness is enough to light the flame of freedom.